Hi, everybody. It's Dot, and I'm here to make sure you feel comfortable and confident going into your literacy profile assignment. It's going to be great. So, here's the big picture. Pan out. Basically, all you're doing is looking at a collection of data, not collecting new data necessarily, not doing anything extra as far as data collection beyond what you would do as part of your normal teaching. And you're going to look at the data you have about a student who struggles with reading. You're going to look at what assessments have been used. You're going to look at what interventions have been tried. You're going to do some analysis of the assessments that have been used in terms of validity and reliability and some of the other features that we've been studying. You're going to look at what the data tell you about that student's strengths and needs. And then you're going to put that together into sort of a plan, looking at the interventions that have been tried and what direction you'd like to go. So basically, it's look at the data, think about the data in terms of the quality of the data itself, and in terms of what it tells you about a reader, and then make a plan. And that's basically it. It's like a 6, 7, 8 page paper with some tables in it. It's really not quite so daunting as it might seem. Okay, so here are the components. I'll let you just look at those for a moment. Here you can click pause if you want to look at those. And I'm going to take you through the specifics. There is, in the end of your McKenna and Stahl text, a chapter that has case studies. And I encourage you to read that to kind of get some language in your ear about how to talk about case studies. In a previous edition of the book, and I think in this one, the authors tell you it's fine to plagiarize their language. Don't do that. That's actually not okay, especially in a course. They're trying to make things easy for you as a teacher, but you're going to write your own language. But just reading those case studies will kind of give you a gist of the kind of information that's included. But this is a key assessment that's part of program evaluation, so I have to guide you to use specific components that'll be a little bit different than those examples. So you're reading those examples for the gist, not for like the micro level information. And so I'm going to walk you through the 4 components. Actually, I'm going to skim all the way down here. Close your eyes, Dramamine. Okay, so basically, this is it. This is your whole assignment. Context and assessments given, the actual data, your analysis of that data, recommendations for future assessment and instruction. That's it. Okay, so let's walk through each of those. Dramamine again. Whee! Okay, so here we go. First thing, please be very aware of using strengths-based language when you talk about the student, when you talk about the school or classroom, when you talk about the family, and so on. So strengths-based language, it's very important. We're starting with what the student does know and can do, even if the student is not performing at grade level. Same with when we think about the school or the teacher, especially if you're working with another teacher's students. What is that teacher offering? What is that teacher trying to do that is of value? Same with parents or families or the cultural context. It's really easy to slip into a deficit way of talking about families when their sort of cultural practices around literacy don't match our own, and we need to really watch for that. Every family brings literacy assets to their interactions with their child, and it's our job to find those and capitalize on them. Okay, so really, like, give your paper a close edit, looking for deficit language. We definitely aren't going to be categorizing students as low, for example, or using deficit language for students. We'll talk about what they can do, and then we'll highlight where they have needs. Okay, so context and assessments. You're going to give a brief paragraph that's going to tell me about the student, the school, the classroom. Doesn't need to be lengthy. This is really mostly for me to help me kind of orient myself to the grade level expectations, where they are, the curriculum, just kind of the gist of what we're looking at here. For parts 2, 3, and 4 here, I would just make a table. So you're going to list the assessments that have been given. I know for a lot of you that'll include DIBELS, maybe the BAS, what else will be there? And in your table, you're going to identify whether you're using that as a summative or an interim screening benchmark or a formative or diagnostic assessment. You're going to map it onto the cognitive model. So you could just have a column that says like cognitive model, and you could tell me like this one assesses phonemic awareness, this one assesses the rate component of fluency, but not prosody, etc. For number 4, describe the strengths and limitations of each assessment using that language from chapter 2 of McKenna and Stahl. So try to talk about those different kinds of validity and reliability. It doesn't have to be exhaustive for every assessment. You're popping this into a table. So, sentences are a smart thing to use here so I can really understand what you mean, but it's not as exhaustive as what you did on the assessment summary assignment, okay? You're just kind of demonstrating for me that you know how to think critically about what these tools can do, what their limitations are, and also please be thinking about potential test bias and the relationship between culture and language assessment and opportunities to learn. So thinking about cultural validity. And also think about the linguistic demands of assessments, the cultural assumptions embedded in the assessments, like what are the topics of the text and the assumptions about what kids know. And especially, well, in any context, it's important to remember that culture and language are a part of every single person's experience of literacy and reading assessment. Yours, mine, everyone's. So don't skip over that, no matter who your student is or what their background is. You probably in this paper are going to want to hit that piece more than you imagine is needed. Also, be thinking about the IRA and NCTE assessment standards, our little manifesto. You don't have to systematically address every single one of those, but you might highlight areas that are particularly strong or particularly weak around a particular assessment or assessment practice. Okay, so this table, you're showing me, I know how to think critically about individual assessments as tools. We're not reporting student data there. Okay, that's my background. Part 2, student data. Report the results. Okay, so create a table. So you've got DIBELS and BAS and I don't know, a phonics assessment and so on. You're going to put each of those in a column or a row and clearly label what the scores mean. So like if you're going to put in 42 CWPM, I want you to imagine that for some reason you have to hand this table to a parent without having a chance to explain it. And you want to put enough information in there that they can understand like what is CWPM, or like what did the student have to do to earn this score? Oh, this tells how many correct words they read in a story in a minute, or whatever it is that you can kind of summarize. This doesn't have to be long, but you're kind of giving me a clue here that you have a really clear, precise understanding of what this data means, well enough that you could explain it to a parent. And we hope, of course, that the assessment data reflects a full range of school and classroom assessments, addressing like all the facets of the cognitive model and so on, and writing and affective factors and all those pieces, right? And probably it doesn't. In most cases, it won't. So you'll see in the rubric that it calls for all the facets to be addressed, or, it's a complete workup of data. But if you find some gaps, even if it's in your own classroom, you're not going to be marked down for having gaps. You don't feel like you have to go and add an assessment of comprehension strategy knowledge or something like that. You don't need to add any extra assessments right now, but you are going to identify the gaps that exist. Like, oh, wow, I didn't assess anything in that bottom arm of the cognitive model. You're going to call that out specifically. You're going to explain kind of overall the limitations of that set of assessments. Like, I have really strong reliability and validity on each of my assessments, but it's missing this whole piece as a set. So I don't have any information about, say, comprehension strategy knowledge. And you're probably going to notice gaps. You'll make recommendations for additional assessments in part 3. You can just leave that at this point. Just tell us what has been assessed, where there are gaps, okay? Part 3, now we're going to look at that table that we made with the student scores on Dibbles and Bass and all the different tools, adolescent reading inventory, etc., or adolescent literacy inventory, and you're going to analyze. And here you're going to be creating like a cohesive piece of writing. So don't give me a bulleted list here. I want to see you synthesizing ideas together. So you're going to look at the assessment data to develop a profile of the reader's strengths and needs. It's going to use strengths-based language. Start with what they do know, what they can do. Make sure you're talking about multiple aspects of the student's literacy. So don't only tell me about their phonological awareness. Branch out. Look at that cognitive model and try to make sure you're talking about all those pieces. Your strengths and needs should be tied to evidence from the assessments. But this paragraph or series of paragraphs here isn't just you listing off the scores that you just reported. You're synthesizing them together. You're making inferences based on those scores and your anecdotal observations about which areas of literacy and reading are stronger or weaker than other areas for the students. You're basing those on the evidence, the data, but you're not just going to report the data. You're reporting what the assessments, you aren't just reporting what assessments the student struggled or did well on. You're explaining what aspects of literacy represent strengths or areas of needs, what the assessment results mean, and showing that you can interpret the assessment data and synthesize it into a kind of a cohesive theory about what is happening when a student encounters a text. So see if you can first figure out what the strengths and needs are, and then like put it in motion. So not just the student is weak in prosody and word ID, etc., but okay, when he sits down to a text, his goal is to just robotically spit out word by word because he feels like that's what readers do. And the main strategy he seems to use is to guess using the first letter in the picture and go on. Okay, so you're trying to talk about what's happening for him, how he moves through the text. Please make a special note again here of any possible testing bias or issues with equity or cultural responsiveness, regardless of who your student is. Okay, no matter how mainstream they may seem, cultural and language are part of their experiences. It could be that a student's background is very well aligned with the content of an assessment, and so that would be an advantage, right? Again, be careful not to use deficit language when discussing cultural, linguistic, family background. Really watch out for assumptions and stereotypes in your writing. And so you can be sensitive to possible contextual factors that might influence student performance, but not use blanket statements about students or families from particular cultural backgrounds. Okay, and then you're going to just make here in number 3 a quick, short bulleted list of your specific literacy goals for this student. So you're going to list them and explain them. So start with the student will. The student will understand, the student will be able to, etc. Often student will or SWEBAT, student will be able to, goals have percentages or rates or numbers in them. That's important to you, go for it. I'm most interested in making sure that you have a strong conceptual understanding of the direction you need to go and that you're relatively specific. So if you notice that phonics is an area of need, okay, but what can you say about specifically what that student needs in phonics based on the assessment data you have? Same with comprehension. Just improved comprehension doesn't give you any guidance for instruction, so you want to try and narrow that down to a meaty goal that's specific enough to help you think, okay, what lessons do I need to be teaching here? Okay, so that was all of part 3, analyzing student data, interpreting the data from the chart, making sure you talk about cultural background, cultural responsiveness, etc. And then underneath that analysis, boom, 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 say 2, 3, 4 or so goals for your student. Not 10, probably not 1. Okay, last piece, recommendations for future assessment and instruction. So first, you're going to be documenting past instructional strategies. Do the best you can. Obviously, if it's a student in your class, you know what you've been trying this year. Um, and hopefully you'll have a chance to talk to their prior teachers, or if there's any intervention teacher that's worked with them. Try to get a sense of what kind of attempts have been made. Like, has the student um, only been offered intervention that um, foregrounds phonics and decoding and doesn't address other aspects of literacy very thoroughly? You're going to notice those pieces. And that's what we're getting at here with explicit attention to the model of reading underlying the instruction. So I'm going to give you some materials to help you think about different models of reading, different ways of describing what readers do when they read. You could say the cognitive model is one. It's really designed as a model for thinking through assessments. But for example, parts to whole or bottom up model is, starting with little bits of language and building up to working with meaningful print. There's a whole to part that is kind of the Goodman and Smith model, that kind of de-emphasizes phonics and really focuses on meaning making, and phonics are sort of caught, not taught. There's a interactive model where all those pieces are in play at once, and there are several others. So um, think about, when you look at the instruction that's been provided, what does it seem like are the assumptions about how reading works that underlie it? So if that intervention was just nothing but letter sounds, letter names, etc., then that might be a parts to whole approach, right? If the whole intervention was just picture walks, that would never happen, but that would be more of a whole to part approach, and so on. Okay. So it doesn't have to, this part does not have to be lengthy, but you're just kind of giving a synopsis of what you know about the instruction that's been given and explicitly talking about that model of reading. Okay. This refers to graphics I've provided. I will be providing those if I have not already. Okay, so then describe how the student has responded to past instruction and interventions. This doesn't have to be lengthy either, but you might have a couple of key points about their progress on their progress monitoring assessments, or probably if you're choosing the student, there might be a lack of progress, what your evidence of that is, and so on. So, a few sentences there, maybe. Make recommendations for future print and electronic assessments. Just throw some, I don't know, I shouldn't say throw something electronic in. Hopefully you have access, and perhaps in this district you do more than other places, access to some electronic assessment tools. That's not always practical everywhere, but it's in the International Literacy Association standards, so it's something we are required to put in our rubric. So I'm prompting you to include that. So this is where you're thinking back to the gaps where, oh, wait, we didn't assess that. That part's missing in our assessment plan. So you're going to make recommendations about further assessment that should be done to get a fuller picture. Okay? And then you're going to make recommendations for future instruction. So you're going to go right to the goals that you made, and you're going to just kind of briefly describe the kind of instruction that you might provide to address those goals. And you're going to talk about that in terms of a model of reading. And again, those are graphics that if I haven't given you yet, I will. So like, you would start from a stance of, because I believe that, or we know that reading functions this way, that these components are involved and interact in such and such a way, it's important for me to address those components in my teaching, and here's how I'm going to do that for this student, or something to that effect. Again, not lengthy. And then this piece is tied to a specific ILA standard. It may seem kind of out of left field a little bit, but it is relevant. So a plan for communicating assessment and instructional recommendations to teachers, administrators, and parents. I encourage you to go ahead and make that genuine. Hopefully, for most of you, this will be a student you're working with, and um, hopefully this analysis will help you to better teach this student, and the analysis that you have done will be useful information for other teachers that work with the student, administrators, parents, etc. Um, you're not going to hand them your whole paper. So what is a strategy, a mode of communication, and maybe content of communication that might be particularly effective in communicating and promoting a positive step forward for the student. So again, not lengthy, okay? Um, so please do make sure kind of throughout each piece, you're thinking about potential testing bias, relationship between culture, language, assessment, opportunities to learn, etc., regardless of who your focal student is, okay? Um, and writing quality, I'll let you review that. You know, we're in a graduate class, so we're going to use our academic writing. And I pop these in here. Again, you can just copy those and drop them right into your paper. The way I work, honestly, what I would do is copy this whole document, paste it into my paper, and then I would kind of work through alongside this and like delete the instructions as I complete them, if that makes sense. And then you'll end up with a polished paper with these headings. Here's the rubric. If you do everything I asked you to do in this video so far and in the description, you'll totally be nailing it on your scores, okay? So I won't read that all to you. Okay, that was longer than intended, as per usual. I hope it was helpful, and please feel free to ask questions. In the document that is linked in D2L, it's a Google document, you can actually insert comments, and I encourage you to do that because then I can see your question, others can as well, and they'll be able to see the answer. Okay? Thanks so much for watching. Have a fabulous day. The magic word is flower. Okay, have a good one.